Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at our first session of our May 2022 meeting. So we're going to begin with a couple of Zoom reminders. If you experience any Zoom technical issues, please call 1-888-799-9666 and choose option 2. Your audio will be streamed through your speakers. If you have any questions for any of the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom on the tab. All of the webinar recordings, slides, and session summaries will be posted on our website at thefdp.org. So now I'm going to pass it off to one of our co-chairs of the FDP, Alex Sullivan.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning or afternoon to all of you. I'm Alex Sullivan. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for Research Administration at Johns Hopkins University and co-chair of the Federal Demonstration Partnership. On behalf of my fellow co-chair, Michelle Masucci, she's Vice President of Research at Temple University, and our interim Executive Director, Richard Seligman, welcome to our May 2022 virtual meeting. I'm so happy that you could all join us. It's an exciting program. We have over 600 registrants so far for this meeting. And speaking of meetings, continuing to look at the timing of returning to in-person, we want to let you know that we are going to continue in a virtual format for this coming September and January, hoping to see you in person next May. This is due to some surveys and continuing constraints that many of our members are facing. So in the meantime, the meeting dates for next year will be posted, but please hold the dates of September 12th through 15th for our September 2022 virtual meeting. Just a reminder that there's still time to register. So if you have colleagues at your institutions that would like to join, it's not too late to register. And in between our meetings, I wanted to acknowledge some of our significant work from our volunteers that's taken place. On March 24th, Lori Schultz from the FDP and Chris Shillum and Shauna Sadler from ORCID hosted a session focused on digital persistent identifiers. This was aimed at helping raise awareness about what they are and how they might be further developed in connection with the new NSPM 33 guidelines. And the NSPM 33 guidelines were themselves the focus of a listening session back on February 28th. And this was with our federal partners and organized by Jim Luther and Pamela Webb. All of these materials are posted on our website, so please go and take a look and let us know if you have any ideas for future off-meeting sessions. There's also been significant work since last time we talked on the development of a communication strategic plan, which will, among other things, result in a much needed refresh of our FDP website. For more information on this and other activities of our committees, please check out our upcoming committee update session later this afternoon. So I'd like to turn it over to Michelle.
Good morning, and thank you, Alex. On behalf of my colleagues, I want to thank our members who have diligently helped us to plan this meeting, building on Alex's former comments. They support the FDP by taking notes, ensuring that the materials and the videos that we all create are posted in a timely manner after the meetings conclude, and through facilitating our committee work and ongoing demonstrations throughout the year. This massive volunteer effort is just part of what makes the FDP such a wonderful community. As Alex noted, we are pleased that Dick Sullivan has stepped in to serve as the interim executive director of the FDP. As you know, he has extensive experience with the FDP, having been connected since nearly its inception and having served as chair of the FDP from 2018 to 2021. As we look to the future, we will also be in touch about the next steps of the process for finding a new executive director who can build on the successes of the past 15 years under David Wright's direction. Dick Sullivan will play a critical role in helping facilitate that process, as well as to provide leadership on most pressing day-to-day matters. We want you to stay connected as we elicit nominations for the position. Our intent is to have a position description posted in the near future so that we can develop a candidate pool and begin reviewing credentials over the summer. We aim to identify a permanent executive director by the fall. We also want to let you know that Susan Sloan, our longstanding champion at the National Academies and director of the Government University Industry Research Roundtable, better known as GWIR, has retired. For those who know Susan, you will understand she didn't want a lot of fanfare associated with this, but there was a very nice send-off for her at the GWIR meetings in February. I was very pleased to attend that on behalf of the FDP. You should know that behind the scenes, she worked diligently to ensure that we would have continuity and support from GWIR and the NAS. Towards that end, we're pleased to let you know that Tom Arison, Program Director within the Division of Policy and Global Affairs at the National Academies, is now serving as the Senior Advisor to the Federal Demonstration Partnership on behalf of GWIR. Tomorrow, we will feature a session on the National Academies for our members to learn more about the relationship between the FDP and GWIR and within the National Academies structure. This program highlight reflects that our relationship with GWIR is one of the most distinguishing features of the FDP because it means that our activities are linked to the important convening role that GWIR and the National Academies play in fostering broad discussions about research policy across government agencies, advocates for research, and our member institutions. We're grateful for the ongoing support that we receive from GWIR and the academies, especially in this time of transition. Today's program will begin with federal updates momentarily. We have planned a coffee hour to discuss topics of interest for our members directly after that session. And as Alex noted, we will report out on committee working groups and have a session on the Great Resignation, or as I like to call it, the 4 R's, and you'll have to tune in to better understand what those R's are. That'll be this afternoon. I'm now delighted to focus our attention on the updates, and I'm turning the program over to Dick Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm very happy to be able to assist the FDP in this role as interim executive director, and I emphasize interim. The FDP is an organization that I've been involved with since its very beginning, and I'm happy to be able to help out. Before turning things over to Debbie Raffi, I just want to make you aware of the fact that Debbie will be retiring at the end of July. And although she has not authorized me to say anything at all about her, I'm going to do that anyway. Debbie has been involved with the FDP since its early days, not its earliest days, because she was only 12 years old when the FDP began, but early in the FDP, she became involved largely because her boss, Chuck Paoletti at ONR, was one of the founding federal representatives of the FDP. Debbie has been a model of the FDP cooperation between federal agencies and research institutions. And she has worked with the FDP over the years to help reduce administrative burden. And I just want to mention 2 instances. First, those of you who are old enough may recall that back in the days when we followed OMB circulars, there was something called time and effort reporting. And it was a requirement that recipients of federal funds have in place systems to be able to substantiate the time and effort of people who were receiving a portion of their salaries from a federal award. And it was seen by many institutions as a very onerous requirement. And Debbie worked with a number of universities to try to come up with an alternative way of providing information that would be both represent proper stewardship of federal funds without reducing accountability. And through those efforts, we have, with the issuance of the uniform guidance, tremendous relief in the area of what was called time and effort reporting. The other example I want to mention is in the area of procurement and the micro purchase threshold. And as some of you may remember, when the uniform guidance was first issued, the micro purchase threshold was set at $3,000. Which meant that every transaction greater than $3,000 would have a whole truckload of requirements regarding competition, solicitation, and other procurement activities that would have drowned all of us in dealing with very small transactions. And again, Debbie worked with a group of universities to come up with ways of collecting some data on transactions and procurements, and was able to show that the vast majority of the transactions are at a very low level. And if we focus all of our efforts on the low level, less than $3,000 transactions, we're not going to have enough time left to worry about the large transactions where the risks are much greater. And again, with the benefit of some data that was collected from a group of research universities, if you know about the current edition of the Uniform Guidance, you know that the micro purchase threshold is no longer $3,000, it's up to 10, and there are even options for institutions that want to increase it over 10. So the point of all this is that Debbie is living proof that the federal demonstration partnership works and continues to work. And I want to just take this opportunity to thank you, Debbie, on behalf of all of us for all that you've done, and to wish you well in the next chapter of your career. And without further ado, I would like to turn things over to Debbie Raffi.
Well, thank you, Dick. It has been, thank you for those reminders of those fun projects that really sold me that collaboration is really at the heart of the objectives that we're trying to accomplish, both the federal agency perspective as well as the university performer side of that relationship. So it's been a long road, but it's been fun. And so what I'd like to do now is just jump into the federal agency updates. I will say for the audience, we are going to be taking your questions through the Q&A chat function, which is hopefully at the bottom of your screen. To the far right, there's a Q&A icon. Go ahead and submit your questions there, and our presenters will answer those questions at a minimum with a written response through the Q&A function, so it's recorded and documented, but also as time permits, they may provide as well a verbal response at the end of their presentation. So with that, we will kick it off with NASA and Christiane Diallo and Mary Sladek. Over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Good morning. I am Christiane Diallo, a program analyst with NASA OCFO Grants Policy and Compliance Branch, and I am joined by my colleague, Mary Sladek, a research program manager with NASA's Science Mission Directorate. Today, we'll be going over a few policy updates, upcoming initiatives, as well as some upcoming notice of funding opportunities. Next slide, please. All right, excuse me, contact information is listed here for any questions you may have following this meeting. Next slide. Next slide. All right, the first item on the agenda, excuse me, is an update to our Grant and Cooperative Agreement Manual. A revised version of the manual was issued on January 7th and include a few updates, as well as clarification to certain policies. We've added a new section that describes the award closeout process and requirements. The 2 points that I would like to highlight here is that preparation for award closeout should be done 90 days prior to the expiration of the awards period of performance. The second point is that all final reports that is required by the awards terms and conditions must be submitted no later than 120 days after the end of the period of performance. We also added clarifying language regarding GCAM's applicability to awards and funding opportunities issued after the GCAM's effective date, which is January 10th. The last major update was clarification that new technology reports does not apply to grants and cooperative agreements that support education programs. The revised version of the GCAM is accessible on the Grant Policy and Compliance webpage. Next slide, please. Following the release of the GCAM, we also updated the proposals guidebook. The guidebook was released on February 4th with an effective date of February 18th. Some high-level updates include clarifying language regarding proposals renewal being funded as new awards. The policy essentially states that recipients of existing awards are permitted to submit renewal proposals to continue ongoing research. However, the proposals received in response to a NOFO will be considered as new proposals and will be reviewed impartially. Additionally, we revised Appendix B of the guide to clarify the roles and responsibilities of personnel identified in the proposals. So effective February 18th, all individuals named on the proposal cover page as a team member must register in Inspires. For a full list of updates to our guidebook, please visit the GPC webpage using the link provided here. Next slide. All right, at the January meeting, we shared that NASA was working on its equity action plan in response to Executive Order 13985, which is aimed at advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities. The equity action plan was completed and released on April 14th of this year and is available in both English and Spanish. It outlines NASA's strategy for mitigating systemic barriers to equity for certain programs and processes, including grants and cooperative agreements. The first action we plan to take is to conduct a barrier analysis of NASA's grant and cooperative agreement policies and processes. This analysis will help us identify barriers that prevent institutions from submitting grant applications, as well as those institutions who apply but do not receive awards. The second action is to increase outreach initiatives, and this will include specialized training, university-centered conferences, and workshops. The third action is to expand the dual anonymous peer review of grant proposals to reduce the impact of explicit and implicit biases that reviewers may have, which can also reduce the likelihood of success from proposers in underrepresented communities. The last action, which my colleague Mary will touch on, is the launch of SMD's Bridge program. This program focuses on research and engineering internships, apprenticeships for faculty at HBCUs and minority serving institutions. If you'd like to learn more about NASA Equity Action Plan, visit the NASA Mission Equity website using the link here. Next slide, please. Next slide, sorry. Okay, sorry, the previous slide, my computer is. All right. At the January meeting, we also shared that we are planning to issue a Federal Register notice on the proposed terms and conditions in response to Executive Order 13985. The notice was published on March 23rd, and the comments period closed on April 24th. So we would like to thank everyone who submitted comments for this FRN. For those that are not familiar with the proposed terms and conditions, it would require NASA grants and cooperative agreements recipients to obtain a quotation from a small and/or minority business, women's owned business, and labor surplus area firms when the acquisition of goods or services exceeds the simplified acquisition threshold, which is currently set at $250,000. In the event that the recipient is unable to obtain at least one quote from these entities, we are requesting that a written justification be maintained on file, indicating why this was not possible. Now, we received several comments and questions, and we are currently in the process of adjudicating those. Next slide, please. All right, the NSPM 33 includes new conflict of interest and conflict of commitment disclosure requirements, where agencies are expected to release guidance and templates informing applicants who and where they need to disclose the information. NASA has developed a disclosure table similar to that of NSF and NIH, and is currently awaiting guidance from the Office of Science and Technology Policy prior to release. The table outlines the disclosure requirements during the pre-award and post-award process, and also describes the information, where the information must be disclosed. Once the table is finalized, NASA will also release its conflict of interest, current and pending support, and BioSketch policy to align with the disclosure table. Next slide. Next item is upcoming changes to property administration requirements. We are currently in the process of updating NASA procedural requirement, also known as NPR 4500, to apply to NASA's grant and cooperative agreements for award recipients. The policy as currently written only applies to contractors with government furnished property. And the changes will include the requirement for award recipients with government furnished property to submit their annual inventory reports using NF 1018, Form NF 1018. Again, the policy as currently written only applies to contractors or profit entities. Additionally, negative reports would not be required if there is no government furnished property. And as a reminder, all institutions of higher education and nonprofit organizations whose primary purpose is conducting scientific research are exempt from this requirement, as well as the use of NF 1018. Next slide. In the fiscal year 2022 appropriations, there were 21 NASA special projects that were identified, also known as earmarks, funded at $22.65 million within the NASA Safety, Security, and Mission Service Assistance listing. The awards will be issued to nonprofit organizations as grants, not cooperative agreements, and the requests for proposals were released on April 12th with responses due on May 12th. Unlike other NASA proposals that are submitted in Identifiers, these proposals must be submitted to the grant officer and technical officer listed on the RFP. And finally, if you have any questions as it relates to the proposal development, please direct those to the grant officer identified in the RFP. Next slide, please. Next slide. All right, listed here are 2 upcoming notice of funding opportunities for NASA Minority University Research and Education Project, also known as Miurep within NASA Office of STEM Engagement. The first opportunity is a planning grant to prepare proposals for NASA's annual small technology transfer. Proposals for this opportunity are due on May 23rd. And the second is a grant to establish a Miurep aerospace for high school students. Proposals are due on June 20th, and there will be a proposal conference this upcoming Wednesday, May 11th. Both solicitations are accessible in Identifiers and grants.gov. Next slide. Next slide. All right. Next is the 2 opportunities within our Space Technology Mission Directorate. The first is from their early stage innovation program. Proposals for this solicitation are due on June 23rd with a notice of intent to propose on May 25th. The second opportunity, which is scheduled to release later this month, is for its Space Technology Research Institute's program. Again, all NASA solicitations are accessible in Identifiers and grants.gov. I will now turn it over to Mary for some upcoming initiatives within SMD. Mary, over to you.
Thank you so much, Christiane. Hi, everybody. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I am thrilled to be able to talk to you today about initiatives out of the Science Mission Directorate. I am part of the Senior Advisors for Research and Analysis, or SARA team. And what we do is we support things like announcements of opportunity, which are very large contracts. On this chart, we're talking about the Earth Venture Instrument 6, which is part of the third standalone Missions of Opportunity Notice, or SAMMON 3. EVI 6 is soliciting investigations requiring development of and operation of Class D space-based instruments, or Class D small sats, which includes CubeSats. And the cost cap for this mission is $37 million. If you have questions about it, please email Hank A. Margolis at nasa.gov. And there are also 2 URLs on this chart that will take you directly to the competition text, or you can have the acquisition homepage at NASA Langley. Also on this chart, the first bullet is a request for information that has comments due on June 1st. And this is regarding a 50-year-old, not 50-year-old, but 50 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences recommended the creation of an independent of NASA Lunar Science Institute. It is now called the Lunar Planetary Institute. It does not share a fiscal identity with NASA, nor is it a federally funded research and development center like JPL. Currently, the Science Mission Directorate funds LPI to be located close to the Johnson Space Center to enable and further NASA's planetary science goals. The URL for this RFI is https://gonasa.gov RFI 22 LPI. Please respond only using our NASA solicitation and proposal integrated review and evaluation system, or Identifiers. Next slide, please. The Science Technology Mission Directorate was mentioned by Christian, and I am pleased to say that the Science Mission Directorate, through our research opportunities in space and earth sciences, NASA Research Announcement or Notice of Funding Opportunity, is going to be having a new program element called NASA's Innovation Core. It's a pilot, and it's intended to provide support for participation in the NSF Innovation Core program. We are partnering also with the Science Technology Mission Directorate. And if you have questions, please reach out to my wonderful colleague, Margaret A. Yancey at nasa.gov. Further, new since last we met, there is an on-demand YouTube featuring Dr. Max Bernstein, our senior lead for Roses. And he will introduce, he's on that video, it's about 90 minutes. He introduces the summary of solicitation. Next chart, please. Christian mentioned our NASA Equity Action Plan and the Science Mission Directorate Bridge Program. The Bridge Program, contingent on the availability of funds, is budgeted for $5 million in FY22 and $7.5 million in FY23. And it's to foster collaboration among Carney classification institutions of higher education that have very high research activity with historically Black colleges, minority serving institutions, primarily undergraduate institutions, and others. And I'm very pleased that I am going to be sending out to the faculty list an invitation from Patricia A. Boyd, to participate in helping to design the SMD Bridge Program. And it is, if you would like to nominate yourself or another to serve on a workshop organizing committee, please do so by May 20th. And again, I will be sending that out to the faculty team, faculty listserv as soon as this session is over. Next chart, please. Finally, I have a request for you all. It looks like Science Mission Directorate will continue to review proposals only virtually, or primarily virtually. We want to thank everyone who has reviewed for us before, during, and after COVID, and we want to remind you that we are always looking for reviewers and for specific topics. And this chart has the science.nasa.gov researchers volunteer review panels link on it, which we hope you will check out. Prior to COVID-19, the hybrid and virtual only reviews at NASA were extremely rare exceptions. In person was the popular standard. And now the senior management, our associate administrator, deputy AAs like my boss, division directors, are discussing and favoring that the predominant peer review practice in 2023 and beyond will remain virtual only. We're very curious in Science Mission Directorate. Please send your comments to me, Mary F. Sladek at nasa.gov, regarding whether returning to the status quo ante, that is in-person reviews, is going on at other federal agencies. And we are curious to know what faculty reviewers think of virtual only. Does it provide a better work-life balance than in-person review? Do you have other comments and concerns? Please do write to me. I'm looking forward to it. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you both, Christiane and Mary Sladek. And again, we will be monitoring questions for NASA in the Q&A application at the bottom, icon at the bottom of your screen. So next up will be EPA, and we have Alexandra Rivera. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Good morning, everybody. Just a few brief EPA updates for the Federal Demonstration Partnership. Next slide, please. So we have a few research funding opportunities that are up and coming. Just want to remind everybody about our reigns, our upcoming webinars, and of course, I have to pitch to you all the grants listserv. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. We have two notice of intents that are opening soon, not just quite yet, but we have the relating perchlorate concentrations in ambient waters with fireworks usage, and one of our national priorities, research on disinfection byproducts and opportunistic pathogens in drinking water distribution systems. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. While I don't have any specific EPA reigns to tell you about, it's pretty slow on the policy implementation right now. All of our EPA grant notifications are available on our grants policy resource page if you want to take a look at any ongoing or past ones that we have. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And I apologize for the error here of the upcoming webinars. I wasn't thinking about May 9th, but we just had one last week on developing a budget. And this particular webinar, which will be made available on our website very soon, highlighted how to develop budgets and budget narratives. And it was an instructor-led version of our EPA's Developing Budget online training course. If any new applicants interested in EPA funding opportunities need some additional information, that recording will be, again, made public on our webinar slide, and hopefully you can take a look at it. Next slide, please. We do have one upcoming one that's scheduled for tomorrow afternoon, Eastern Standard Time. And this is really geared toward financial management of EPA grants. And we're highlighting our Finance Center folks on financial management, how to enroll in our ASAP system, properly draw down and account for funds, make any adjustments in that payment system, submitting financial reports, and how to financially close out the grant. Next slide, please. We did have a few past webinars. Earlier in April, we had a very specific competition process, and that highlighted how to find and successfully apply for EPA grants. And previous to that, at the beginning of the year, we had a grants award process webinar. And this was a webinar that was high level, that covered topics relating to finding and applying for grants, as well as the basics of managing an award. All of these webinars have been recorded, transcription, as well as the slides. So if you navigate over to our EPA grants webinar page, you'll be able to find all of these past webinars and view them at your leisure. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight again our EPA grants listserv that we have. This is utilized to send out any periodic updates about any of the reigns or any guidance that's posted to our website. The trainings and webinars that I just highlighted, we announce those through there. Any grants management change requirements and other just general information. And this link here is available to you if you'd like to subscribe. All you have to do is submit your name and email address, and you will be added to our list to get all of these updates. Next slide. That's just a little highlight screen that if you navigate to the main EPA grants page, it's one of the rotating pictures there, and it's one click away, and you can then sign up for our listserv. Next slide, please. That's my contact information. If you have any questions about EPA's grants process or awards or research, I'm happy to take any of your questions. And if I don't have the answer, I'll make sure that I get you to the right person. That's all I have today. So I don't see any questions and answers for me. So I'll turn it over to Debbie.
Thank you, Alexandra. Appreciate that. All right, next up will be NIH, and the presenter is Avery Tucker. Over to you, Avery.
Hi, good morning or afternoon. My name is Avery Tucker. I am, excuse me, a grants policy analyst within the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration at the NIH. And today I'm going to be providing some policy and system process updates. Next slide, please. So as of March 15th, 2022, NIH is currently funded under the Consolidated Appropriations Act. And this budget is effective until the end of the fiscal year. NIH published its associated fiscal policies alongside the adoption of the budget. We also published a guide notice with updated stipends and associated information for the NIH National Research Service Awards, or NRSA awards, as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. The revised NIH grants policy statement was published in late December and is applicable to all NIH grants and cooperative agreements beginning on or after October 1st, 2021. This update incorporates new and modified requirements, clarifies certain policies, and implements changes in statutes, regulations, and policies that were implemented through the appropriate legal and/or policy process since the previous version of the NIH GPS, which was dated April 2021. As a standard, a significant changes table outlining the major changes was published alongside the grants policy statement update and is linked on this slide. Throughout the remainder of the fiscal year, NIH will continue to publish any interim grants policy changes or clarifications through guide notices, which can be found on the NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts website, also linked on this slide. Next slide, please. Moving on to another update. Last fiscal year, NIH announced that NRSA recipients are eligible for childcare support. This initiative started out exclusively for NRSA fellows, but was expanded to trainees on institutional training awards later in the year. So each full-time NRSA fellow or trainee is eligible to receive $2,500 per budget period to defray childcare costs on applicable eligible NRSA awards. There are more details in our guide notice and FAQs, which are linked on the slide. And I want to highlight here that while NRSA fellows do need to apply for this additional funding, NRSA trainees on applicable training grants do not. NIH built in the cost to the award automatically, similar to how we award institutional allowances. And any childcare costs that remain unused will be offset as unobligated balances in future years of the award. Our system updates for childcare costs for training grants were implemented earlier this fiscal year. So any non-competing continuation training awards issued on or after March 2022 should have childcare costs included for all eligible trainees. For questions about childcare costs on individual awards, please be in contact with the grants management specialist named on the notice of award. As you can see on the slide, we have a link to the guide notice with the updated instructions for both fellowships and training awards, as well as the FAQ page that we continually maintain for this program. Next slide, please. Moving on to briefly touch on commitment transparency. Last year, NIH issued a guide notice clarifying the requirements for submitting other support and bio sketches. Our overall goal in clarifying this policy is to facilitate transparency and reporting of all research activities, both domestic and foreign, not merely financial. In line with the guide notice linked on the slide, NIH now requires that applicants use the updated bio sketch and other support format for all other support submissions as of January 25th, 2022. Beginning that implementation date of this past January, NIH now requires use of the new format pages, electronic signatures, and submission of supporting documentation in line with what is described on the guide notice and updated GPS. I also want to note that NIH worked closely with the Office of Science and Technology Policy, or OSTP, on the recent National Security Presidential Memorandum 33 implementation guidance that was issued, and our other support implementation aligns very closely with that guidance. NIH has this extensive FAQs on this topic, and we also have a central mailbox for questions on this policy. We're doing our best to answer them as they come in and have recently updated our FAQs to address some of the most common questions. They're linked on this slide as well for further reference. Next slide, please. Moving forward to some systems process updates. Also, as of this past January 25th, 2022, applicants must use the Forms G application packages. These form packages have been posted to all active funding opportunity announcements at this point, and a summary table listing all the significant changes was posted alongside the updated instructions. The associated instructions are available at the NIH application guide website linked on this slide. And as a reminder, application due dates were not affected by this change in form. Next slide, please. As declared in a recent guide notice, as of this past April 1st, 2022, PMS, or the Payment Management System, began pre-populating the data in the cash transaction section of the Federal Financial Report, or the SF 425, most often referred to as the FFR, in the HHS Payment Management System. Instead of recipients manually entering this data, PMS now pre-populates the cash transaction section using real-time recipient cash expense information from PMS, adjusting recipient reported disbursements to equal cash advance drawdowns on all non-closed subaccounts. At the time of each drawdowns, recipients now must certify whether the cash drawdown request is reimbursing expenditures or is an advance of immediate disbursement. They also must assert at the time of cash drawdown that funds are used in compliance with all terms and conditions of award and federal statutory requirements. You can see the linked guide notice on this slide for details. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to touch on FFR submission in PMS. We've heard from the recipient community that some folks have been having issues with FFR submission. This has been ongoing. We hope that recent changes to the Federal Cash Transaction Report have reconciled many of the issues that recipients have been reporting. In the short term, NIH notified the recipient community that our agency will provide leniency as appropriate where there are continued challenges preventing recipients from submitting FFRs in a timely manner. As of last March, NIH requested that FFRs be treated as interim annual reports, which don't have all the validations and editing restrictions of final FFRs. Since March 2021, PMS has been converting all NIH final FFRs into interim annual FFRs on a weekly basis. So for folks still facing issues with FFR submission that need to employ this option of submitting interim FFRs in the place of final ones, recipients should be indicating in the remarks section of the FFR that the report is final rather than an interim FFR. Again, relevant guide notices are linked on the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. So in order to facilitate resolution of FFR-related issues, this slide contains contact information for various points of contact and some links to training resources on this topic. The slide is broken down on who to contact for systems policy inquiries, ERA system support, and as well as PMS system support. So including this slide for everyone's quick reference in order to resolve these issues in a timely manner. Next slide, please. As of last September, the NIH and ERA partner agencies expanded the requirement for ERA users to use two-factor authentication. For all external user communities that access ERA's external modules, including Commons, Commons Mobile, Internet Assisted Review, and Assist, ERA began a phased approach for requiring the use of two-factor authentication for user accounts. This phased approach applies to all scientific account holders, but excludes administrative accounts until mid-2022. Step-by-step instructions, FAQs, and related helpful information are linked on this slide. Next slide, please. So for our last systems update, I'm going to touch quickly on iEdison transitioning from NIH ERA to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, in the summer of 2022. This transition will incorporate several new system capabilities and enhancements. Some of those updates include the ability to initiate two-way communication with agency staff, integration with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office database, which will hopefully ensure accuracy and reduce recipient reporting burden, optional real-time email notifications throughout the reporting and review process, and enhanced security through login.gov. All existing data, including attachments associated with the invention and patent reports, will be transferred over to the new iEdison system, and existing and new iEdison accounts will be associated with the new system as well. Next slide, please. So before closing up, I wanted to provide some reminders related to HHS and Fed-wide systems that will be affecting NIH applicants and recipients. Next slide, please. As many of you are aware at this point, there were recent changes in the federal-wide unique entity identifier requirements. Excuse me, sorry. So there was recently a federal-wide effort to move towards the use of a new government-owned unique entity identifier, or UEI, to replace the Dun & Bradstreet DUNS number in all of our systems. The federal-wide government stopped using DUNS in April of this year, and entities registered in SAM were automatically issued a UEI. NIH required UEIs for competing applications starting this past January with the Forms G rollout. And within the next couple of weeks, entities registered in ERA Commons will begin to see their UEIs and historical DUNS information. And by the end of June, the RPPR module will also fully reflect the Forms G and UEI forms. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation for today. I have listed some email inboxes that you can forward questions to. And I think, Debbie, there are a couple questions in the chat box.
Yeah, so you have a couple minutes if you want to answer those right now, Avery, or whether
Sure.
you want to, someone might take some follow-up and you can follow up later. So over to you, back to you, Avery.
Sure. So I see there's a question here asking if there are any updates from NIH on Science CV for other support. None that I can provide currently, but I think you are correct. There is a session later in the week, and I would advise folks to attend that for further information. I see a question here about turnaround time for the NIH Other Support Help Desk. Apologies to anyone that had submitted a question and hasn't received an answer. I would say at this point, please do follow up with the Other Support Help Desk, or I'm assuming when you say help desk, you mean the email inbox. If you haven't received an answer, definitely please follow up and I will make sure that we respond to you in a timely manner. I see a couple more questions here about a URL for iEdison. I'm not sure that I have the answer to these questions right at this time, but I can try and follow up and answer within the chat any remaining questions that come up for NIH.
All right, great, Avery. Thank you for your time. And next up will be Department of Homeland Security. So over to Heidi Custer.
Thank you, Debbie. I am Heidi Custer. I'm a senior policy analyst in the Division of Financial Assistance, Policy and Oversight, which is affectionately known as FAPO. There we go. I'm having problems with my camera here. And I'm also at the tail end of bronchitis. So if I start coughing, please excuse me for that. Next slide, please. FAPO is a headquarters office and we support the 7 grant-making components. This is quickly our mission and goals for anyone new to FDP. Next slide, please. The 7 grant-making components here at DHS are Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, CWMD, CISA, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, FEMA, as you can see from this chart, gets most of our money. ICE has one grant that they pass through to the National Center for Missing and Exploiting Children. Science and Technology has most of our research grants. The U.S. Coast Guard funds boat safety, and their funding actually is not appropriated. It comes from a trust fund. And then the U.S. Citizen Immigration Services, USCIS. Next slide, please. So what FAPO is working on at this point in time is we are the hub for all Data Act reporting. We're focusing in on implementing DHS grants measures. We review the funding of opportunities. The NOFOs come through our office and we coordinate with OMB, and then they're published on grants.gov. The performing oversight reviews, actually, we work with the different components and we review the programs to make sure they're implemented according to the Financial Assistance Policy Manual, which is drafted and published from our office. Then our current initiatives, which would affect you, would be Buy American, the Presidential Management Agenda, Area 3, Strategy 2, which is a mouthful, the Civil Rights Evaluation Tools, and as been discussed before, NSPM 33. And I'm running through those quickly because I have slides for each one. So next slide, please. So OMB put out the Memorandum 22-11, which provides guidance to implement Buy America, Buy American, Build America, Buy American Act, which is hoping to bolster America's industrial base and protect our national security and support high-paying jobs. So starting next week, May 14th, agencies must make sure that the grant programs that fund infrastructure comply with a section of this act. So we have reviewed this with our Office of General Counsel, and we have included terms and conditions in the DHS standard terms and conditions for this. And there is a memo that outlines waiver principles and criteria, excuse me. So if you have any questions on that, you can send them our way as well. Next slide, please. So the Presidential Management Area, Agenda Area 3, Strategy 2, which is a mouthful. Basically focuses in on building capacity in federal financial management through federal financial assistance to catalyze American industry strategies addressing climate-related risks and deliver equitable results. Again, that's another mouthful. We've just started in on that. DHS's Deputy Secretary is one of the leads for this area, so there should be more information to come on that. Next slide, please. So in January, the Biden administration announced several executive orders to address and advance equity across the government. So DHS's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties took action on that. So they have developed a civil rights evaluation tool. And this tool will assist recipients in operationalizing civil rights legal requirements and meeting obligations under this new law and regulation. So what this means is recipients have to submit information if they've had civil rights complaints and policies and procedures that would help resolve those complaints. And again, we have a term and condition for this as well. So I've included a link for this for the assistance tool, and as well as an email address for CRCL. So if you have any questions on that, you can submit it there as well. And next slide, please. And finally, the NSPM-33, the other agencies have reported out on this as well. And we are working with our offices to to start working on this as well. But I have noticed that there is a session tomorrow at 11. So I would suggest that folks attend that as well, because as you can see, all the different agencies here have, included that in their slides. So that's something that's up and coming. So if you don't have any other questions for me, I don't see anything in the box. So I'm going to turn it back over to Debbie.
Thank you, Heidi. All right, next up is National Science Foundation, Jeremy Lefler. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. So it's a pleasure to be with you here this morning. I have a number of things to speak with you about. So if we can go to the next slide. So again, I'm Jeremy Lefler. I am responsible for heading all of the outreach that the policy office does. And we are comprised of a very small team. As you know, Jean Feldman heads the policy office. We also have Samantha Hunter and Beth Strausser, who are senior policy specialists. Ann Doyle is our policy analyst, and she serves as our clearance coordinator. She's responsible for reviewing and coordinating funding opportunities and other related documents for clearance. And Suzanne Plimpton, who's joined us and is responsible for Paperwork Reduction Act clearance with OMB, and also is responsible for reviewing and coordinating MOUs, Memoranda of Understanding for clearance. What I will say is when you do have questions related to policy, you see the email address on the screen, policy@nsf.gov. Please do send us an email. If you have questions about a specific funding opportunity, we do recommend reaching out to the Cognizant Program Officer or program officers. And if you have a question about a specific award, we recommend reaching out to the Cognizant Grants Officer. Next slide, please. So I have a number of items to speak with you about today. I'm going to touch on NSF's newest directorate. I've got a bit to say about the draft proposal and award policies and procedures guide, or the PAP guide. A reminder on submission of project reports. Again, some reminders on research.gov. I want to touch on some of the other sessions that NSF is participating in this week with the FDP, and then a number of outreach opportunities that I think you should all be aware of. Next slide, please. So first off, NSF's newest directorate in more than 30 years, the Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships Directorate, or TIP. It was just launched by the foundation. And while it rearranges a number of existing programs at NSF, it comprises three primary focus areas. The first is fostering innovation and technology ecosystems. And this includes programs like the Convergence Accelerator, which builds on NSF's investment in basic research and discovery to accelerate solutions towards societal and economic impact. The second focus area is establishing translation pathways. And this includes programs such as the Partnerships for Innovation program, the NSF I-Core, and the SBIR and STTR programs. These are established programs, and they were realigned into the TIP directorate. The third focus area is partnering to engage in the nation's diverse talent. And this is intended to ignite partnerships among academia, industry, government, nonprofits, civil society, and communities of practice to blend expertise and resources, advancing research, innovation, and education. This new directorate, it increases the foundation's reach by expanding eligibility standards to proposers and awardees that have not typically done direct business with NSF previously. Next slide, please. So where are we and what is our timeline with the PAP guide? So as you know, we use the federal-wide Paperwork Reduction Act process to formally clear this document. And this requires a 60-day standard to obtain public comment prior to agency implementation. Typically, clearances are provided for a 3-year period, but to ensure our policies and procedures are up to date, we go through this revision process annually. So as you can see, the 60-day comment period began on April 13th and concludes June 13th. You want to follow the instructions in the Federal Register to provide your comments to NSF, and you'll find the full draft PAP guide linked on the Policy Office website. After receiving comments from the community as well as internal to NSF, we work to address all of those comments prior to sending them to the Office of Management and Budget for final approval. This year's PAP guide is particularly challenging because we're working to implement a number of foundation-wide changes, as well as implementing the NSPM 33 implementation guidance, which you've heard quite a bit of up until this presentation. We're targeting October of 2022 this year for issuance on the NSF website and a January 2023 implementation date. So that's that 90-day period from the time we issue the PAP guide to the time it's implemented gives you the opportunity to train your staff and faculty on the major changes. It also gives you the opportunity to make any necessary changes to your systems for compliance with these new or modified policies. So I mentioned this will become effective in January 2023. This is the same timeline for moving from Fastlane to Research.gov for proposal preparation and submission. And we wanted to ensure that our guidance in the PAP guide is written in such a way that's consistent with this major change. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some of the proposed changes in the draft PAP guide. And at the outset, let me just say that due to time constraints, I'm just going to touch on the most high profile proposed changes in the PAP guide. So what you'll see is that the PAP guide is linked in the Federal Register and on the Policy Office website, and it includes all of the proposed changes in a very digestible format. We highlight the proposed changes along with a brief explanation of the changes in the margins. This will aid you in going through the document to provide comments should you choose to do so. So let's talk about the transition from Fastlane to Research.gov. In September of 2020, the NSF Director issued Important Notice 147, and it included for the first time a date by which NSF would no longer accept proposals in Fastlane. The important notice specified by the end of 2022 as the date proposal preparation in Fastlane would cease to exist. The PAP guide, the draft PAP guide, has been revised to remove Fastlane as a submission option for any new proposals submitted or due on or after the implementation date in January of 2023. So it is important to emphasize that active proposals that were originally submitted in Fastlane will continue to be available to the proposer for use in the submission of proposal file updates and budgetary revisions for a limited period. But all new proposals will be required to be submitted in Research.gov in January 2023. We are adding a new type of funding opportunity to the mix with this draft PAP guide with NSF's use of the Broad Agency Announcement, or BAA. These are currently used by other agencies to solicit research proposals. The term BAA refers to a solicitation method used by NSF for basic and applied research, scientific study, and experimentation. And unless otherwise specified, NSF can choose to fund proposals submitted in response to a BAA as grants, cooperative agreements, or contracts. They are broad in their subject matter and focus on advancing science rather than acquiring specific products. We've also rolled out a new vehicle submission of a proposal in response to a BAA, and that is the BAA Management System, or BAM. The use of concept outlines and the new prospect tool. So some NSF proposal types or funding opportunities may require the submission of a concept outline in advance of submission of a full proposal. Some examples of these include planning grants, rapid, eager, and raise funding types, where you are required to be in touch with the program officer prior to submitting the proposal. The primary reasons for requiring a concept outline are to ensure that the concept being proposed by the PI is appropriate for the funding opportunity, and to also help reduce the administrative burden associated with submission of a full proposal. Concept outlines will be submitted by the PI via use of the prospect tool, that's Program Suitability and Proposal Concept. Prospect consists of a dashboard and a web form for PIs to prepare, send, and track the status of their submissions. And you will need to have a valid login.gov account to access that tool. There is also in the draft PAP guide a new requirement added to the special information and supplementary documents section of the proposal to address submission of a plan for safe and inclusive field, vessel, and aircraft research, or PSI. So given that field research is a necessary component of many STEM fields, such field work may present unique challenges that can increase the likelihood of harassment, including but not limited to challenging physical conditions, social isolation, and limited communication methods. So each proposal that proposes to conduct research in the field, including on research vessels and aircraft, will have to include a PSI as a supplementary document. It has a limitation of 2 pages, and the coverage in the PAP guide identifies what NSF's expectations are, as well as the content requirements for this supplementary document. Next slide, please. We continue to make some changes to both the biographical sketch and current and pending support documents. In the biographical sketch, the collection of professional preparation requirements has been revised to increase standardization among research agencies. The biggest change by far with this PAP guide is that the biosketch and current and pending support documents must be prepared in Science CV, and that static PDF formats that you can use now and that are available on our NSF website will no longer be an option. So this is being done because of the requirement from the National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA, Section 223, that senior personnel must certify that the biosketch and current and pending support are accurate, current, and complete. And the certification done by them will be done upon download from Science CV and will also be printed upon those documents. For current and pending support, we've also increased standardization, incorporating NSPM 33 requirements. Through the PAP guide, NSF is also encouraging the use of ORCID to increase the amount of pre-population in the biographical sketch and current and pending support. And there are more changes to the biosketch and current and pending support that will be covered in other sessions this week as it relates to implementing NSPM 33 guidance. The biggest ticket item for current and pending support for you to know is that NSF will require, as part of its disclosure policy, that current and pending support be uploaded, updated, I should say, prior to making an award at the recommendation phase of the review process. Now, this is just for those proposals that may be recommended for funding. Proposers will be required to provide an updated current and pending support so that NSF can look to see if there is the capacity to work on the project now that we've had time since the submission of the initial proposal. So NSF is looking at capacity. NSF is also looking at whether there is an impact on overlap or duplication. So this will be asked prior to making an award for when an award is being considered. It's not a guarantee that an award will be made. And I should also point out that this is currently a best practice at NSF, and beginning with the PAP guide implementation next year, it will become required. Next slide, please. The requirements for goalie proposals, the grant opportunities for academic liaison with industry have been modified to permit non-SBIR STTR small businesses to receive funding from a GOLI award. On research security, we've added a new section on research security to identify the purpose of research security at NSF, as well as NSF's research security initiatives. And the coverage highlights NSF's post-award disclosure requirements. Implementation of Build America, Buy America, and Made America statutes. This has already been discussed as a federal-wide requirement that must be implemented by May 14th. So while there will be coverage in the upcoming PAP guide, the implementation of this requirement happens at the end of this week. NSF will be issuing new sets of terms and conditions on Friday that will incorporate the Build America, Buy America article, and you will see this coverage in the entire suite of NSF terms and conditions. We have added a new section to the PAP guide on scientific integrity. Coverage on scientific integrity is not new to the PAP guide. This added section now summarizes expectations in the area of scientific integrity. All organizations and personnel supported by NSF are expected to uphold the highest standards for scientific integrity, which builds on key principles of honesty, objectivity, ethical behavior, transparency, and professionalism in the conduct of scientific activities. For the last couple bullets on this slide, there will be new checkboxes on the proposal cover sheet. One is for DIRC, potential life sciences dual use research of concern. That box will need to be checked if use of select agents or other enhanced potential pandemic pathogens are envisioned, and those agents or pathogens are used in ways that lead to enhancement of specific properties specified within the policy. The other new checkbox is for proposals that contain that plan for safe and inclusive field vessel aircraft research, which I just discussed previously. Next slide, please. So this is just a reminder on submission of required project reports. All required reports must be submitted within 1 year of the period of performance end date. For NSF, this means annual project reports, final project reports, and project outcomes reports. At that time, the federal agency must close out the award, and any awards that are closed with unsubmitted reports must be reported to FAPIS as a material failure to comply with the terms and conditions of the award. Also, we want you to be aware that overdue project reports can delay future funding and award amendment actions. We did issue an important notice last year to reinforce that timely project reporting is a term and condition of an award and demonstrates results-oriented accountability for NSF awards. So we encourage AORs to regularly check the project reporting status of their awards, and you can do this using the research.gov project reports module. FAPIS records are based on entities and not PIs. So even after a PI has left your organization, it's still the organization's responsibility to ensure that all required reports are submitted in accordance with the award terms and conditions. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go into great depth on the transition from Fastlane to research.gov for proposal preparation and submission, since my colleague Stephanie Yee will be covering this in detail and in a demo during a session on Wednesday this week. Suffice it to say that NSF has been communicating with the community for years on the transition from Fastlane to research.gov. As I mentioned, the director issued that important notice in 2020, emphasizing that we were taking proactive steps to incrementally move from Fastlane to research.gov. And again, beginning in January 2023, all new proposals will need to be submitted in research.gov. We have currently about 80% of NSF funding opportunities are supported in research.gov. That's 80% and not 100% of funding opportunities because we're still adding some functionality. And we're looking at the deadlines for each of the funding opportunities and migrating them when it can be done to give the research community at least 90 days before removing Fastlane as an option. We're seeing right now about 46 or 47% of submissions coming through in research.gov, but we want that number to climb higher. We want that transition from you all to happen earlier rather than later, because we want a smooth transition for both the research community and for NSF. It avoids the rush at the end, which could overwhelm our help desk. And it also gives you the opportunity to continue to give us feedback on any issues that you identify. Again, look at the funding opportunity because it'll clearly specify whether submission via research.gov is available or required. We're adding it to solicitations whenever possible as a submission option. Even if Fastlane is not yet removed, it's being added as an option. We're not eliminating grants.gov as an option for submission. However, there are limitations that remain. For example, separately submitted collaborative proposals cannot be submitted in grants.gov. Next slide, please. Here's just a quick list of other sessions happening this week at FDP that with an NSF participation. There's a session on Science EV Tuesday at 11, on the NSPM 33 implementation guidance on Wednesday, a research.gov demo, as I mentioned, on Wednesday, and an OIG discussion on promising practices for award management on Thursday. Next slide, please. Some information on upcoming outreach activities. So the Spring Grants Conference will take place virtually June 6th to 10th. Registration will be at no cost, and it opens on Wednesday, this Wednesday, May 11th at 12 noon Eastern Time. We also began a webinar series this year focusing on specific topics. The first one we did in January on current and pending support. It is available for on demand on the policy outreach website that you see here. And we'll have another session on June 30th titled Subawards Assessment, Approval, and Monitoring. Again, you can go to the policy outreach page and sign up to be notified of all of the events that are taking place and also see all of the presentations that are available on demand. Next slide. And just finally, some resources for you of all of the things that I have mentioned. There's a lot more on the website that you see here, but here's some quick links to some of the most pertinent items. And that's it for me, Debbie, so I'll turn it back to you, and I'll, in the interest of time, just go through the questions in the Q&A if there are any.
All right, thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate that update. All right, so over to Ms. Tara Warner. She's going to do the NIFA update. So over to you, Tara.
Thank you, Debbie. Hello, everyone. I am pleased to be able to present the NIFA update today. As said, I am Tara Warner. I am the Acting Division Director for the Financial Management Division for the Office of Grants and Financial Management at NIFA. Next slide, please. Okay, this slide is outlining some priorities. We're going to go over our next few slides, how our priorities align with that of our department, USDA, addressing the needs of our partners, and what we have on the horizon. Next slide, please. So some of our USDA priorities that we have listed here, we have in common in large with our department. Of course, we're always going to be a champion for climate change and addressing climate smart agriculture and forestry. We are always advocates for DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which means that we're always going to be a champion for advancing racial justice, equity, and opportunity, creating more and better market opportunities for our customers, tackling food and nutrition and security, and making USDA a great place to work for our employees. Next slide, please. So in regards to addressing the needs of our partner, we recognize that we are working hard to be a true and a better partner. This includes listening through input sessions from our partners, more webinars and feedback sessions we're making available. We're focusing on higher quality customer service. We're building back 4-H headquarters with strong, experienced leaders and new science advisors at our land grant universities. And we're also working to extend our RFA deadlines, specifically in response to Smith-Lever Special Needs Competitive Grants and Smith-Lever 1890 Extension Capacity Funds. Next slide, please. So for NIFA on the horizon, we have over $1 billion in funding for USDA assistance and support for historically underserved farmers, ranchers, forest landowners, and operators, and other groups. $60 million invested in our AFRI, education and workforce development for 4-H and positive youth development. This is the single largest infusion of NIFA funding for 4-H in the agency's history. We also have a new investigators opportunity for our AFRI foundational RFA with technical assistance for that program, NIFA peer review panels, the best professional development opportunity available at prs.nifa.usa.gov to sign up for, and new focus on helping universities improve and develop better practices through civil rights audits. Next slide, please. So this slide is addressing realizing NIFA's potential. Now, we now have our staffing levels almost back to the way it was before we are transitioned from DC to Kansas City, and we expect to reach full staff levels this fiscal year. We're working on continuous process improvement for our processes and increasing our customer service. And new tools have also been added to the NIFA website, like updated lists of NPLs, a redesigned programs page, new capacity funding flowcharts, and in February, we will move to an upgraded platform with many new improvements in content and flow of the website. RFAs are being restructured to streamline them and make them more user-friendly. And each quarter, we're also adding more enhancements to the NIFA reporting system for streamlining and reducing the burden of reporting on our partners. And we also are making sure that our employees are better trained and making sure that the peer review channels receive better training to provide top quality feedback on grant proposals. Next slide, please. So this is one of our efforts in increasing our customer service for our partners. It's called the Customer Experience Team Pilot. It was started in August of 2021, and you can read there some things that we have going on with it. The what is that it's a team that we have set up across NIFA with different SMEs to address customer service issues quickly, with consistency and with a high quality effort. The purpose is to effectively listen and address some of the common problems that we have encountered with customer service. And the impact is to minimize frustration and unnecessary burden to our customers and also for our staff. The accomplishments associated with that is that we established a shared mailbox that streamlined customer access to NIFA and serves as a central repository for issues that we need to analyze and also provide process improvements. So I'm sure you all are familiar with having to run around an agency or an organization for different PLCs. This is a one-stop shop to improve our customer service. Next slide, please. This is a detail of our scheduled program implementation from RFA to award. And the acronym we use for that is SPIRA. It was launched in 2020 to provide a means to plan and evenly distribute the grants management lifecycle workload. And it establishes an annual program schedule. And the current status of that is that we have an update scheduled for fiscal year 2023. And that update will apply to all capacity, AFRI, and non-AFRI programs. So until recently, SPIRA was only able to set planning dates and modify when needed and report actual results. And we have new Tableau dashboards that are coming up in order to help us to show the impacts of this process and to actually use it as a calendar for planning and to ensure that we speed up the process for providing grants as much as possible. Next slide, please. This is just a slide that has some links on the PowerPoint that you can access later for some NIFA resources in relation to competitive grants, capacity grants, coronavirus updates, and frequently asked questions, and also weekly updates in regards to NIFA. Next slide, please. This is showing that we have renewed commitment to partnership and service. We are on this mission together, and we welcome your input and feedback at every point along this journey. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. And this is our non-discrimination statement, once again showing that NIFA is devoted and champions diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. And if there's there's also information up there on the PowerPoint for you to assess later if you have any questions or concerns about discrimination associated with USDA and NIFA. Thank you. That's all I have for today, Debbie.
Thank you, Tara. Appreciate your presentation. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up with the Office of Research. I do not have any particular slides, but I just wanted to follow up on what Dick Southman mentioned at the beginning, a federal agency update in that, yes, after 36 years of government service, I have decided to retire at the end of July. And so it's that 36 years includes 29 years at Office of Research, and many of those years involved the partnership with the FDP, gone through a lot of phases together. But I learned so much from the FDP community about my job and the various jobs I've had over the years, the many years at ONR. And I have no doubt that collaboration is fundamentally essential to working out the challenges of federally funded research and to improving the partnership. And I truly appreciate the opportunities that the FDP gave me to have that experience and just see example after example of things that can get done with the performer community as well as the various federal agencies that fund things. So my plan is to truly retire and spend more time on the golf course and with family and friends. So I do have a cooling off period for 1 year, so please don't come after me until at least a year. And then, I've learned based on federal colleagues that have retired before me that it's not a good thing to say never. But I do have a cooling off period of at least 1 year to consider any changes in retirement. So, but with that, I'm going to throw it back to Dick to wrap us up.
Thank you very much, Debbie. And thanks to all of the presenters from the various federal agencies. The federal agency update session is one of the most important and well-attended sessions of FDP meetings going back many, many, many years, because it presents an opportunity for people to learn straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, what's happening in the various agencies with which we work every day. So thanks again to all of you for taking the time to bring us up to date. Finally, at 1 o'clock Eastern this afternoon, we will be having a coffee hour. You have to provide your own coffee, unfortunately, but the coffee hour will be a chance for some informal discussion. When you log in to the coffee hour, you'll find that there are several different topics. You can pick a topic that seems to be of interest to you and join that group. And if after a while you find it wasn't all that interesting, you can pick another topic and move on. So we hope to see you at the coffee hour later this afternoon. And for now, we will stand adjourned. Thanks very much.